program is brought to you by the following sponsors.
Out of all the Persona spin-offs we've gotten over the past decade or so, the Persona 4 Arena games are some of the least talked about, but also some of the most fondly remembered by the people that played them. When Persona 4 Arena released in 2012 for the PS3 and Xbox 360, because it was a fighting game from Arc System Works, and because it was good, it brought a whole new level of attention to the series. I know many people that became fans of the series through these games, and these games even had a pretty strong competitive scene for a while. And, on a side note, it was also the first Megaton game that I ever bought new on day one. I even still have the original receipt. In 2014, we got an update/sequel, Persona 4 Arena Ultimax, with some new characters, the ability to play as shadow characters, new features, and a new single-player story that started where the original left off. Once again, it was also very well received, but unfortunately, it didn't have as much of a lasting impact as the original, due to it being only available for the PS3 and Xbox 360 almost a year after the PS4 and Xbox One were out. Now, here we are in 2022, more than a decade after the release of the original Arena in the arcades, and we are finally getting a re-release of Ultimax for PS4, Nintendo Switch, and PC. I've never talked much about these games before, so despite this game's age, I'm going to be doing a proper full review for this video. That being said, I'm going to start by addressing the question that I'm sure most fans of the original are asking. Has anything changed, and is there anything new? And the short answer is yes, and the long answer is not much, because most of these new features lie with the 2.50 update, which was only released in arcades, and also the enhancements of the new consoles, and the added improvement of Rollback Netcode, although this feature is absent from the Switch version. The 2.50 update made it so that shadows can now burst, and Shadow Frenzy uses SP and lasts longer the higher the user's SP is. And as for the game itself, the resolution is sharper, it runs better, and on the PC version, you can adjust the graphical settings however you like, up to 1080p resolution at 144Hz. Although with this being a 2D anime-style fighter, this game isn't too demanding, and I'll get more into that at the end. Now, with the new rollback netcode, what the game does is it smooths out lag by attempting to predict what the other player is going to do, and if it predicts wrong, the game will roll back to the correct state. It's a feature that's becoming more and more common for fighting games, and it's one of the reasons competitive players are so excited about this release. The next question I'm sure most people intending to play this game on PC or Switch are asking is, how well does it run? Well, my laptop has an RTX 3060 mobile with an AMD Ryzen 9 processor and 16GB of RAM, and I'm able to run this game at 1080p 60Hz on ultra settings with no issues. So far, the only issue I've encountered is that there have been a few times where the sound has randomly increased in volume, but that's about it. So, from personal experience, I could say that technically, this is a competent PC port, but if you've encountered any issues with the PC version, please post them down below in the comments. As for the Switch version, there aren't any compromises that I noticed purely from playing. The game runs at a good 60 FPS, and if there were drops, they weren't enough for me to notice, and even when I played in portable mode, I didn't encounter any noticeable performance or display issues. So, lack of rollback netcode aside, I can confidently say that you're not getting a botched version if you go with the Switch version. But now let's get into the game itself. As I mentioned earlier, this game is a 2D anime-style fighter from ArcSys, the makers of BlazBlue and Guilty Gear, so this will already be very familiar to fans of those franchises. You have light attacks, heavy attacks, and special attacks that involve your persona. As with most fighting games, you're encouraged to experiment with characters' moves, find the best combos and use of special attacks that you'll need to beat your opponents. Although for this game in particular, some of these mechanics have been more streamlined to make them friendlier to people that are new to fighting games, like being able to easily auto-combo by repeatedly pressing the light attack button. Generally, your persona's attacks are stronger than your normal attacks, but if your persona gets hit while executing one of these attacks, the attack will be interrupted and you'll lose a persona card. And if you lose all of them, you won't be able to use your persona for a while. Some other elements that have been taken from or inspired by the mainline Persona games are Ailments and the SP meter. Ailments have varying effects, but usually aren't anything game-changing because they usually wear off once the target gets hit again. And then the SP meter, which you can use to execute certain special moves, and goes back up as you fight. Some other mechanics include things like Furious Actions, which can help you break out of a punishing combo, All-Out Attacks, where you can knock the enemy back and rush them, and Bursting, which gives you invincibility frames and can either restore your SP gauge or briefly increase your damage depending on how you use it. This game is actually pretty well balanced, and there's a lot of variety in the different characters' playstyles. If you prefer fast characters with a more aggressive playstyle, you might want to run with either Yosuke, Chie, or Sho. If you prefer tankier characters, go with either of Labrys's forms, Kanji, or Akihiko. And if you prefer zoners, you'd be best with Aigis, Yukari, or Ken. Many of the characters also have their own unique quirks or gimmicks that make them stand out. For example, with Aigis, you can go into Orgia mode, which lets her fly and makes her combos faster and stronger. Labrys has this axe meter where her attacks get stronger the more you use her axe. Akihiko has a cyclone meter, which goes up and makes some of his attacks stronger every time he cancels a special move. And Ken, who can have Koromaru use attacks even when he's far away. You'll definitely have a lot of fun experimenting with the different characters and their special abilities. And with over 20 unique playable characters, plus the shadows, you have a lot of options to mess around with, although I imagine most players will quickly find their main and stick to them for competitive play, which for me is Aigis, although my favorite character to play as is probably Margaret, mainly because she uses not one, but 3 personas, and they're actually Kaneko personas, those being Yoshitsune, Kukulane, and Ardha. Yeah, gotta love how Margaret is a better representation of the wildcard than Yu is. Anyway, this game has quite a bit in the way of single-player content, and the biggest one is definitely the story mode. Like most fighting games, rather than having a central story that focuses on the entire cast, Arena is made up of multiple smaller stories that tell the experiences of each individual character. They're told through these visual novel-style cutscenes, and for what they are, they're very well done. Not only do the backgrounds and character portraits look great, they're almost fully voice-acted, and the characters' mouths move when talking and they blink every now and then. These may sound like small things to gush over, but I think this really helps make these character portraits seem more lifelike. And while Persona 5 did do this too, Arena did it almost half a decade earlier. Now, the central plot really isn't anything special. It takes place 2 months after the final events of Persona 4, where Yu comes back to visit Inaba, and conveniently enough, right after he gets back, there's a wrestling show on the Midnight Channel involving the entire main cast of Persona 4, and Rise, Kanji, and Teddy have all gone missing. So, the cast goes into the TV world to investigate, and once inside, they're forced to fight each other in a tournament called the P1 Grand Prix. And how these events unfold all depends on whose story you're playing as. It's basically like one of the character arcs for the original game, but with a cool fighting game twist. At least that's the case for the Persona 4 characters. For the Persona 3 cast and the game's new character, Labrys, the story is a bit different, and assuming you play the stories in the order the game wants, they're mostly pretty repetitive, but they do get a little more interesting as you go on. I say a little because even though the introductions are different and the way the events pan out are slightly different, it still pretty much boils down to the character entering the TV and fighting their way through the P1 Grand Prix. And while the characters do show some development in their stories, most of the character issues that are brought up here are things that were already brought up in the original games. Of the stories for the original Persona 4 cast, I think my favorite is probably Naoto's, because up until she goes into the TV world, her story is basically a spy thriller, and unlike the others, her story actually does bring up some new issues with her character. In the original Persona 4, her whole introduction arc was about her coming to terms with the fact that she can still embrace her femininity and still be a good detective, while here, it's about her being too dedicated to her work and caring more about it than her friends. I also quite like the stories for the Persona 3 cast, because they show what the characters were doing after the events of that game. Mitsuru created the Shadow Operatives, which is a top-secret organization that hunts shadows and deals with Persona-related activities. And Aigis's starts with her rescuing hostages, while Akihiko's starts out in his journey wandering the Earth looking for new people to fight. And then there's Labrys's, whose story is probably my favorite in the entire game, purely because it actually gives you a first-hand look at the studies that the Kirijo group was doing, and how the anti-shadow suppression weapons were developed. If you're a fast reader like I am, these stories will take you around 45 minutes to an hour to beat, but if you're one of those people that takes your time to read everything and waits for the characters to finish talking before moving on, they'll take you well over an hour and a half, which, given how similar these stories are, I think is a little longer than necessary, especially given the fact that you get maybe 2 minutes of gameplay for every 10 minutes of cutscenes. By the time I'd finished Naoto's story, I was just ready to be done with it. Despite my criticisms though, the central story was interesting enough to keep me invested, and it is still nice to be able to experience a story told from these characters' perspectives. You will learn some things about them because of this, like the fact that Yosuke listens to both Linkin Park and Nickelback. I just wish there could have been a way to experience this story with it feeling like less of a slog to complete. While I don't regret playing through the entirety of Arena's story, I can really only recommend doing this to people who are just hardcore Persona 3 and 4 fanatics and absolutely need to experience everything their spin-offs have to offer. Otherwise, I'd recommend just going through Yu's story, then Naoto's, then the characters from Persona 3, then Labrys's, and then finish past their cliffhanger endings once you unlock them, and don't bother with the rest unless you're just a really big fan of that character. Now, that's going to be it for Arena's story, but keep in mind that what I've said so far is only about the story mode for the original Persona 4 Arena. We still have the entire story of Ultimax to get to. Without getting into spoilers, Arena ended on a pretty big cliffhanger, and Ultimax takes place not long after where the original left off. After a mysterious power outage, a red fog envelops the whole town of Inaba. Mitsuru, Akihiko, and Aigis have all been captured, and there's a new P1 Grand Prix. And instead of taking place inside the TV, the tournament now takes place in Inaba, albeit a weird, twisted version of Inaba. I said earlier that the story for the original Arena felt like one of the character arcs of Persona 4. Well, the story for Ultimax feels more like a disaster movie. The stakes here are much higher, with General Teddy even saying that the world is going to come to an end. Rather than being divided into individual character stories like the first game, it's instead divided into 3 episodes. You have episode P4 and 3, which follow the cast of their respective games, and episode Adachi, which follows, well, Adachi, who was DLC in the original release. Throughout the P3 and 4 episodes, you jump between different characters and different scenarios. What I like about this story is that when the events of the game start, everyone is caught off guard and doing their own thing, and they have to quickly scramble to get together and stop the looming disaster from happening. And this results in a lot of cool set pieces, like Rise discovering that she can actually use her persona to fight, Shadow Labrys coming out again to fight Sho, and listening to Junpei and Yukari argue like a married couple.
What you'll hear next is a true story, a tale of mystery and fear.
Feather punch! Knock it off, you know I hate that ghost story stuff. And when did you start coaching kids?
Ow, will you stop hitting me? Didn't I tell you I coach a kids team, and I'm surprisingly good at it?
Is that why you reek of sweat? Do you ever wash that shirt?
What kind of slob do you take me for? And you're one to talk. You're wearing some pretty funky clothes yourself.
I have a reason for this, jeez. I knew I should have changed.
And yes, you heard me right, there are also more Persona 3 characters added. Pretty much every single one with the exceptions of Makoto and Shinjiro. And seeing these two groups work together to fight against each other's shadows is really cool. In fact, the story itself, while still being a sequel to the original game, now seems to be more connected to Persona 3, with the majority of the events being directly related to things that were referenced in that game. And then there's episode Adachi, where Adachi is broken out of jail by the antagonist because he wants his help. This sounds cool in concept, but in execution, not so much. Gameplay-wise, it's more or less the same as the original. As you go around, you'll have to fight fake copies of the characters, though in most cases, you actually get a choice of which character to play as. For the original, I complained about how basically the only gameplay was limited to fighting the characters in the tournament, and in Ultimax, it's pretty much the same deal, but they at least contextually have a better reason for it here. Now, both the Persona 3 and 4 episodes can be beaten in around 2 to 3 hours, while the Adachi episode shouldn't take you any more than 30 minutes, which is considerably shorter than beating all the stories for the original, but considering how much of a slog it was to finish all those, I'm more than okay with this. Overall, I definitely say I had a better time with Ultimax's story mode than with the originals. While it does have its issues, especially with the writing, it never got to a point where I had to force myself to keep playing, nor did I ever lose interest. Now, as for the other single-player modes, you have Arcade Mode, which has you going through a series of best 2 out of 3 battles as a character of your choice, with a drastically shortened story, and you're scored based on your performance. Then there's Score Attack mode, which is kind of the same thing, just a little bit harder, and you can actually see which opponents you're going to be fighting. And then there's Golden Arena mode, which brings in RPG elements from the mainline Persona games. You choose a character and go through a quote-unquote dungeon with a series of floors, quote-unquote, where you choose a navigator who gives you special abilities, and after every battle, you'll gain some experience points, and when you level up, you can increase your stats that affect your performance in battle. And you can also learn skills that also affect your performance and give you special abilities too. It's definitely an interesting mode, and for those of you that enjoy wave-based survival modes and or don't like to play against other people and really enjoy the RPG aspects of the Persona games, this might be the mode that you get the most enjoyment out of. But it's still just you fighting AI enemies over and 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 over. I got tired of it after the first 15 or so rounds. And then of course you have your practice modes like Lesson Mode, which is your basic tutorial, Training Mode, which lets you practice against a dummy opponent, and Challenge Mode, which basically lets you practice your combos. But, as with most fighting games, the main draw here is the multiplayer component. Obviously, you have your standard 1v1 versus mode, which can be played with your friends in person, but you also have your online mode, which allows you to play against other people across the globe, now with Rollback Netcode, on PC and PS4 anyway. Now, I wasn't able to play the ranked match mode on either of the versions that I have because I couldn't find anybody, which was probably due to the fact that I played this game early. But on PC, I was able to play private matches against a few of my online friends, and I had a mostly stable experience. When I tried connecting at first, I had issues connecting to rooms and randomly being booted out, and when we did start playing, we were dealing with some pretty serious lag, but this issue did stabilize after a few minutes, with only occasional lag here and there before and after matches. I unfortunately wasn't able to test out the online component for the Switch version at all, because nobody else I knew got this version early, and I haven't played the PS4 version, but I have heard that the experience is much smoother on there, so yeah. Speaking of which, isn't something missing here? Oh yeah, lobby mode? You know, that one mode where you can run around with the little chibi characters and challenge other people and roleplay and make memes and stuff? Yeah, that's completely absent from the PC and Switch versions. The PS4 version still has it, but PC and Switch? No siree. I can understand the Switch version not having rollback netcode due to technical limitations, but this, just why? Was adding this mode to these versions really too much to ask for? I know to some people this may seem like a minor exclusion, and to some people it just may be a waste of time, but I can't fathom why they just completely omit this mode from 2 of the game's 3 platforms. Now, visually, this game still holds up pretty well, as far as 2D anime fighters are concerned anyway. I mean, it's not the most graphically impressive fighting game, not when it came out, and especially not today, but like other anime fighters, it has a certain charm that 3D fighting games just don't have. The character sprites and animations look good, the stages look good, the FMV cutscenes are surprisingly well animated, and I already talked about how well done the visual novel cutscenes are. As far as sound is concerned, well, many of the songs are taken straight from Persona 3 and 4, but there are some original soundtracks, and the remix soundtracks are pretty great too. The English voice work is also amazing. I mean, not only is the voice acting good, with it having Labris, who might just have the best voice of any English dubbed character ever, but they also managed to get most of the voice actors to reprise their original roles, and the ones that don't do a great job of imitating the originals. And, I mean, you really can't complain about characters being recast if one of the new voice actors they bring is Wendy Lee. In conclusion, Persona 4 Arena Ultimax, despite all its flaws, is still a great fighting game, and this is definitely a worthwhile re-release. Normally, I'd feel the need to complain about the lack of new features or changes, but at the same time, I'm going to be a little more forgiving here because, while Ultimax isn't a perfect game, I don't really think it had any detrimental issues that absolutely needed to be addressed. I think this game really just needed a re-release more than anything to get it out of that 7th generation barrier that it was stuck in. Because it's on the PS4, it can now be played on the PS5, and because it's on PC, people will be able to play this game for generations to come, and I think that's what's most important. My only major complaint regarding this re-release, aside from the aforementioned lack of lobby mode on the Switch and PC versions, is that there's no crossplay. I mean, I can understand this being the case for the Switch version due to the lack of rollback, but really, I can't play on PC with my friends on PS4 and 5? cross-platform and even cross-gen is starting to become the standard for most online multiplayer games, so not having it here just feels like a big kick in the Mara. I don't know, maybe Atlus will patch these features in the future. I mean, I want to think so, kind of like how they patched selectable skills and fusion into Nocturne HD, but I'm not gonna get my hopes up. Oh, and also, why is the Western version a digital-only release? I can understand if it was coming out on a dying platform like the Vita versions of 3 and 5 Dancing, but the Switch, PS4, and 5 are all very successful consoles. With this release being digital only on consoles, it probably doesn't mean the game is doomed to fail, but it's not really going to help it either, at least for the console versions. I mean, I was always planning to get it digitally on PC, but I was still probably going to buy the PS4 version physically, but now, without a physical version, I'm probably just going to skip it. There is one good thing though, and I can't tell you how proud of Atlus I am. With this release, there is no Day 1 DLC. They finally did it.
Congratulations! Congratulations! Congratulations!
Congratulations!
Congratulations.
So, do I think you should buy this release of Persona 4 Arena Ultimax? Yes. Even though there's not much added in this re-release, and the strip features on certain platforms is indefensible, Persona 4 Arena, like I said, is still a great game. And also, like I said, I think this re-release was necessary, not only for preservation purposes, but also because this release will hopefully bring this game back into the competitive scene. Like I said in the beginning, I know a lot of fighting game fans that became Persona fans through this game when it came out almost a decade ago, and hopefully that happens again with this release. And for what it's worth, you're getting a pretty good value for what you're paying. This version of the game will cost you $30, and it comes with not only the game, but all the DLC, including Adachi, Marie, and Margaret, the full story mode from the original Arena, and most of the music packs, the ones that they had the license to use anyway. As for which version, well, it really just comes down to preference. If you really absolutely need to have lobby mode, go with the PS4 version. If you're willing to sacrifice that and roll back netcode for portability, go with the Switch version. And if you want more controller options and don't want to have to pay to play online, go with the PC version. Another thing that's cool about the PC version is that, even for a 2D fighter, it's not very demanding. According to Steam, the minimum requirements needed to run this game are 3GB of RAM, an Intel Core Duo E8400 processor, and a GTX 250. So even if you're on a notebook or potato PC, you can still probably run this game. Whether you played the original or not, whether you're a Persona fan excited about this quote-unquote new spin-off, or you're a fighting game fan looking for a new game to play, this is definitely a game that is worth your time, and I highly recommend you check it all out, using the link down below in the description. And that is going to be it for this video. I hope y'all enjoyed, and be sure to let me know what you think. If you haven't already, be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe, and if you want to give me a little financial support, consider leaving a Ko-Fi donation of just $3. Till the next video, I will see you all later.